Today we got one of the biggest stars on the independent scene, literally and figuratively. Some call him the Carmel Colossus, Mr. Barrington Hughes. Barrington, how are you today, sir?
What's going on, my man?
How was your fandom in wrestling? Like, who were some of the guys you liked?
When I broke in, I was a huge Razor Ramon fan. When I first broke in being a fan.
Yes.
Loved Razor Ramon, loved 1-2-3 Kid. I was a big Ron Simmons fan, too. I watched a little bit of WCW early on. Baker, so many others. And then after I started training and really started opening up the tape library, and I forgot about the Great Southgate. I discovered Great Southgate in high school through old tape trading.
Oh, okay.
So shot the Great Southgate well. So when I became more active and I started reading, I started looking around, started watching a lot of different guys. One that comes up to my mind is Gary Albright, who doesn't really get enough credit as being a legit fucking monster. French, but he's one of the biggest, baddest mofos that just doesn't get enough love. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I've recently started discovering Gary Albright, actually. Someone hooked me up to that, and you ain't lying. Very physical. That all Japan style, too. Like, I've been learning about that recently. Oh, my God.
Big time, bro.
You said Ron Simmons, yeah.
Because it was so unexpected. Nobody thought. They knew it was going to be a good match, but nobody thought that Simmons had a bad chance down of the title. And then one snap power slam later, and count the lights, you're like, yo, this really did happen. And you see that crowd and the way they erupted in reaction to it. It was a genuine feel-good moment, you know?
100%. That's what I still remember is that crowd. They're just jumping up and down. So how did you break into the business? Who helped you and who trained you and got you started?
Okay, so basically somebody that's very close to me helped me find the school and started training in December of 2010. I started training under Rusty Brooks and Flex Magnum, who was local to South Florida at the time, and he was honest with me. He's like, look, if you want to take this serious, you will. I'm more than willing to train you, but it's up to you to do the work after that. They gave some tips and pointers on how to negotiate the business a little bit, how to navigate with promoters and things and what to expect. And, I trained for 9 months. I started off as a manager, then I broke off shortly thereafter, and just been going ever since.
I was noticing your nicknames. You had like the Carmel Colossus, the Carmel Kodiak, and Milf's favorite wrestler, which I love. I was wondering, like, how does that come about, like the nickname process? Did you have a say in that, or is it promoters are like, here, try this out, or how's that?
The only one that a promoter gave me was Carmel Colossus, and that was when I got to LW. I wanted to go back, but they were really adamant on the Colossus thing to kind of pull up my size. And it's like, okay, I guess, but everything else has always been, my creative process and always trying to be a little different because everybody thinking amazing and spectacular. Pejorative, they use a lot of description type words when they're giving themselves. And it's like, let's be a little bit, I always thought to myself, I can be a little bit more creative than that. And one of my favorite practices has always been Method Man. And if Method Man, he's always had 20 plus nicknames. So I kind of looked at that and was like, well, let me play around with a few of these and see what I came up with. And then remembering the old Oreo ad from back in the day, Milk's favorite cookie, I was like, So I, tooled around with it a couple of times, and that's how we came up with Milk's favorite wrestling.
It's funny you said, like, have a bunch of nicknames like that. Because when I started getting back into, like, independent wrestling, like, I'll say 2015, one of the first shows I went to, David Starr was there and had, like, 10, 12 different nicknames. And that hooked me. Yeah. I'm like, oh, that's different,
Right. I've actually done introductions where they I give them a list of like 3 or 4 different monikers. So by the time I get in the ring, I can hit my toes, and it's hilarious. But I've kind of get it from that since then. I'm kind of going through a reinvention right now.
You were, if I'm right in my research here, you studied graphic design. Has that helped you out in wrestling, whether promotion, T-shirts, posters, or anything?
Oh, for sure. When I first broke in, before I even became an active wrestler, I would design costumes and stuff. I would do a lot of gear work for local guys and trying to bring in some unique styles and from all the way from my local independents all the way up to the WWE. I did a lot of Daniel O'Brien stuff during the title run back in the day. I've done stuff for T.J. Perkins. I've done stuff for quite a few notable guys. And it's always been a passion of mine. I was always an artistic kid growing up. I just love doing it.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to have a lot of irons in the fire, too.
Absolutely.
One other thing I noticed about, like, I couldn't confirm, but are you into powerlifting as well?
Somewhat. I'm super amateur powerlifter. I've never competed, unfortunately. I do want to eventually, once my health allows, we'll get back into it and really give it a shot. But I train like a powerlifter. My tag team partner, he's done it in the past, so he kicks my butt every time we go to the gym. But I love it. I love the aspect of just raw strength.
What are some of maybe the worst injuries you suffered in the ring?
In ring, I've been lucky enough, knock on wood,
Oh, okay.
to not suffer any in-ring injuries. But recently, I actually had a health scare where I had some lung issues due to some bad habits. Nothing drug related, thankfully, but it took me some time to recover and get back. And now I'm getting a whole lot better. I was in the hospital for about 2 months, and I was in a coma for almost 2 weeks at the beginning of the year.
Wow. So okay. So well, you're happy to be here right now. Then very good. Are you still with MLW at this moment?
No, I actually requested my release back in December, which was granted at the end of the year.
Okay. So looking to do some more stuff independently when things get back to normal, maybe, and health is good for you.
Absolutely.
A lot of the real world issues that are taking over are more important probably than wrestling. We are in a crazy time. Like, I was listening to this article today. It's like we have basically like the race riots from the 60s. We have like, a plague. And we have elements of like the depression with a lot of people out of work right now.
Oh, yeah.
How has some of this stuff affected you negatively or, trying to stay positive? Like, what's some stuff going on with you right now because of this?
I mean, of course it affects you negatively. Thankfully, my family, we're maintaining fairly well given the circumstances. I'm out of the hospital, and I got out of the hospital right before the COVID scare got really bad. So that was really perfect timing on that. And then from there, I've just been doing my thing with my family, making sure they're good. And just recently, in the past week, I want to say, I've just kind of taken it upon myself, me and several other wrestlers of all walks of life, not just black wrestlers, have just really started saying, you know what, we're going to start policing the business. We're going to start cleaning up the good old boys, the racists, the negative, and just really make it a better space for everyone involved. So that's basically what's keeping up a lot of my time.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's something we should all be working on, just in general in our life, to like be better people and try to listen more and work with other people to make sure we should all be loving a little more, basically,
We should. Unfortunately, not everybody sees it that way. That's the problem.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's amazing. Like, I'm a white guy, but my mom's Puerto Rican. We grew up, though, like in an African-American community when I was younger. My father, race was never an issue, is my point, like in my family. So I didn't really think about this stuff, and I would hear things when I was a kid, and even as a kid, I was like, "Oh, that's off." You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, "No, stay away from those people." But I thought we had kind of gotten beyond that a little bit over the last few years, because a lot of younger people I know are like totally not about that at all. Like, just the complete opposite. Like, they're about welcoming everybody. But like, then you see these things happening now. It's like, geez, we really have to deal with this 2020, and we have all this other shit going on, and it's just like, it blows my mind.
It's frustrating. It's really frustrating, because you think that we as a people have gotten past this and grown from it and gotten better, but because so many people are not willing to tackle the issue head on and say, you know what, this is really a problem. This needs to be addressed. Everybody's like, it's not that bad, or we have other things to worry about. It always gets moved down the docket to where it never does. So now we've come to this point in 2020 where it's still a problem. It's still prevalent. And then because of things that are coming from the top that help ignite that negative rhetoric, now you have people kind of going at each other for no reason outside of the color of their skin, which is really fucked up.
Yeah, I feel like you're right. Like, I don't want to get too political, but I feel like there's certain things that have set us back, if anything, too. And it's like, we got to play catch up here big time. Is that part of this? I don't know this. I don't know if it's connected, but I saw on your Facebook, #NahFam. Is that part of this, or what is that?
No, NahFam is just me.
Okay.
NahFam is just, that's my thing. Now, the other hashtag, I don't know if you've been checking the last few days, the one that really, I started a hashtag call out a racist.
Oh, okay.
There's also another one call out racist that I'm kind of including because it's more expansive. And a lot of guys that unfortunately have been called out in the past few days, it's been really bad. I'm not name names. If you go down the list, you'll see them everywhere from local promoters to guys that have been all the way to the top. And it's like, it sucks. Because a lot of these people we watched on TV and we admired and we liked them, we supported them, or we bought their merch, and then you see how they think and they feel about it, and it breaks your heart.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been eye-opening to say the least. Just the amount of hate that's out there. Even like I've heard like on the flip side of that, like people that are generally outraged and should be, but like I heard some guy say his solution was, well, we need to genocide these racists and these horrible people. And I'm like, well, genocide doesn't seem like where we should be going with anything right now. Like maybe we all need to love and try to figure out how to handle this, but at the same time, man, I get where the anger's coming from because, like I said, like I start seeing this stuff now, and I'm getting older too. But I don't know, everything I see on this stuff like just makes me so angry. It's like, oh,
Yeah. Here's the thing, man. It's a generation of people that are not willing to listen to the voice of reason. You have young people that want to be progressive and want to do things different, but we're not coming together to say, okay, let's hear each other out. Why do we feel, and how can we get past this and move forward? That's the problem. There's so many different things that need to be done, but nobody knows where to start.
I mean, tough to segue, but we'll go back to wrestling a little bit here. You know, talking, you're a very passionate guy. I can see that. What about the art of a promo? Like, how is a promo something that was it challenging for you? Was it something you felt you excelled at? Where do you put that in, like, the terms of the wrestling game?
Promos, listen, man, if you can cut it, and this is prevalent today, if you can cut a good promo, your skills don't have to be, and it's not saying that you're not supposed to train, that you shouldn't have your skills up far. But certain things that you may lack in the athleticism department, you can more than make up for in promos, and being able to tell a story with your body, with your words, with your mind, being able to pull people in and make them feel what you feel, or make them or manipulate those emotions. That is a fucking good promo to me. You know, I saw that very early on by, a former tag partner, still a good friend of mine, Ben Meltzer. He really taught me the nuances of promos and having, my mentors that I have now in Low T and MVP and Jay Horn. There's a lot of guys that helped me over the years really understand the importance of the promo. And they say, you should be able to get your point across. So what I wanted to start doing with the guys that I mentor and the guys and girls that I talk to, because I'm not just guys and girls that I mentor, I tell them all the time, stop cutting wrestling promos. And it's going to sound weird as hell when I say this. Don't do wrestling. Watch acting monologues. Watch stuff that you see where somebody's trying to get you to feel something or relate to something. And then apply that to wrestling. Because that way, it doesn't come off as, well, I'm going to be here at this place at this time, and I'm going to face this person, and this is going to happen. You see how redundant that can be after a while. We've done that for 30 years.
Right.
And if you go past that basic promo, then, brother, you're not going to move up that card. But you get somebody like me that can pull in some emotion and make you think about something, whether it's laugh, cry, get you mad, and I have more value to a promoter. I have more value to myself above anything. You know what I mean?
100%. One of the things I liked about the NWA Power promotion is that they would get guys in the studio and they would cut promos off the mic, and like guys like, I'll just throw like Tim Storm and stuff out there. You can tell it's like, oh, that guy is who he is. Like that's a legitimate, not too far from what he is.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And that's what it's about, man. Like, I've had the opportunity to work with Tim Storm, and he's a great dude. Especially for his age, he can go.
Yeah.
He goes, he's not super driving off the top rope, but he can brawl and he can go step to step when need be. But he has that emotion. He has a love for the business, and you feel that every time he talks to that mic. Same thing with Nick Aldis. He believes he is the best thing smoking in professional wrestling, and if any person cutting a promo doesn't believe that, or you don't feel that you're the best thing, it's like, right? Why do it? Don't waste your time. Don't waste the pain's time.
Yeah. Like one thing as a fan, I would say that, we'll take Aldis for a second. One thing I like about him is his persona, his character, and the way he articulates everything, and even down to his in-ring work and the way he brings it all together. It feels like a big fight feel. It doesn't feel like I'm watching a pro wrestling match. It feels like I'm watching a heavyweight championship boxing match or an MMA fight for the title.
Exactly. That's what we have to bring back into wrestling, that big fight feel. Mm-hmm. Every bout part should feel like, oh, man, I can't wait to do it. And if you can't get that emotion, you need to get a manager that can do it. Right. And that's another thing we're missing in the business now, are competent, talented managers. Mm-hmm. I'm blessed that, that's really good. And he's learned over the years, and gotten a lot better in my boy Dan Ragu. But you have a lot of managers that they're not adequately training, or they're not, they're not taking their craft seriously enough. They're weekend warriors. They just come and do these lame duck promos, or they're not putting in the work they're supposed to. and they're wondering why their guy's not getting over because they're not doing their due diligence. That's why.
Heel, face. Do you have a preference, and what are some of the challenges of both?
I've always liked working heel. It's always been fun to me because I like to be able to cuss people out with no consequence. It's easier for me to get people to hate me than to like me. But for some reason, in the past few years, fans love me. I'm like, okay, well, what is I started off as a heel manager when I came in. Didn't really cut the best promos, but those have gotten better over the years. But anytime, whether it's myself or with my tag partner in Tragic City, we always try to, put our best foot forward, whether it's heel or face. If we're going to be baby faces, we're going to have that crowd behind us. We're going to be raucous. We're going to be the party starters, not necessarily dancing and singing because that's not what we do anymore. But we're going to get that crowd behind us, and then hey, we're coming to do work. We're coming to bring war. You know what I mean? And then the same thing as heels. Yes, they're like, here we go. It's going to be another funeral. It's that kind of feel that we try to bring, depending on each side of the coin.
When you're performing, and I've heard this slogan, I think we kind of alluded to it earlier too, like, coming from the heart. Like, there's a saying, you don't want to play wrestler, you want to be the guy. Would that be the equivalent, like when you're getting ready to go out there, do you have to almost like flip a switch? Is it kind of like a thing, like, okay, you got to psych yourself up and get a zone before you go out to the ring?
Absolutely. For me personally, at least 30 to 10 minutes before a match, I have to listen to music. I have to listen to certain songs that get me hyped. Not necessarily hype as in like, oh man, I'm hyping off the walls, but I have to get into the proper mindset of the story I'm about to sell. Once I feel that emotion, that feeling, like, now it's going to be work. Now it's time to go out and do what we're paid to do.
That's right. I like that. Now, not going to keep you too long today. Just tell me, what are some of the goals you have in wrestling still that you want to accomplish, or maybe even life goals?
A few of them actually are, once I get medical clearance to return, definitely get back out and hit the indies with a vengeance and put in some serious work. Just really show that Barrington Hughes is more than a one-trick pony that was seen on TV. I feel like I have the handcuffs on a lot of times in MLW, because a lot of people have seen my indie work. They're like, yo, I didn't know you could do all that. I'm like, well, here we are. So I'm hoping to do that and really branch out, get on the international floor, Germany, Japan, Mexico, England, really start doing the rounds as a big man that you really don't see a lot of big men do. So I really want to open the doors for other big men behind me to know, hey, we can hang with the best.
Awesome, man. Want to tell people where they can find you, or do you have anything you want to promote as well? Go for it.
Yeah. You can find me on Instagram. As I stated, I was going through a character reformation. I am officially now Black Thanos Barrington Hughes, BLAQUE, Thanos like the character. Black Thanos PH on Instagram, Black Thanos PH on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook, Barrington Hughes. The fan page, not my personal page. I will not add you. But other than that, and if you want to buy a shirt, the Black Thanos shirts are coming soon. Check out whatamaneuver.net. We have some t-shirts coming soon, same place. Like the Tragic City page, like the Magic Canal page. Show love the black wrestlers, man. Show love the gay wrestlers. Show love to white wrestlers. Show love to Asian wrestlers. Show love to native wrestlers. Show love to wrestling. Show love to everybody, man. Love who you love.
Damn right.
Hey, this is Kid Cash, and you're listening to the Working Fan Podcast.
We got a special guest, a former ECW TV champion, former TNA X Division champion and tag champion, also a former WWE Cruiserweight champion. Guy's done it all. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only KIDD, Kid Cash. Mr. Cash, how are you today, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good, sir. I'm good. I saw you started out in 1989. I know you were trained by Ricky Morton and Tim Horner. Were you always a lifelong wrestling fan, though?
Yeah, I watched it. I grew up in Central Virginia, and I grew up on NWA, and that's all we got. Every now and then, we would get like Georgia Championship Wrestling, but that would be like really late at night on a certain channel, and stuff like that. So, I watched it, but I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so, I had a lot of land and stuff like that, and, horses and stuff. So we worked a lot as kids, out there in the fields and stuff like that. And whenever I did get a chance to watch it, I did like it, and had my favorites.
So were you very familiar with Ricky Morton?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I grew whenever, like I said, I was, 70s and 80s. So whenever, I don't know, probably about 1985 or 6, it's probably when I first saw them, and it was NWA brought those guys in, and
Yeah,
totally watch them.
that's the time I started following NWA as well, was during that Rock and Roll Express, Four Horsemen kind of era. Yeah. What was it like training with Ricky, Tim Horner? Did they ever give you any really good advice that you still use today, out of the ring and in the ring?
Yeah, just take your time. Just take your time, man. Don't overload yourself, and listen to the crowd. That kind of stuff. But which, not that I wrestle anymore, but it kind of works in life,
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Have you been able to get any independent dates with everything going on, or?
I haven't been looking for any. I retired in 2015.
Okay.
And I was out for till about 2000, late 18, and I just started doing a few shows here and there, just once every 3 or 4 months, just for some people that I knew, and didn't have to drive far or anything like that, just something to just kind of be a part of it still in a way, and mostly being more of an agent kind of guy back in their dressing rooms. I was doing UCW for a while, down in Georgia, and they draw big crowds, and he had like a lot of big name stars and stuff like that on the show. So him and myself and Kevin Sullivan would kind of run the dressing room, and we were doing TV tapings and stuff like that. So Kevin was running kind of like all the TV kind of stuff, and then I was running the dressing room as far as the guys and, critiquing the younger guys and, that kind of thing. So I kind of like doing that. And plus, I still do seminars, things of that nature. I get booked on those quite a bit. So, but I have a real job. I'm a project superintendent for a pretty large construction company, and we build hotels and things like that, and high rises and stuff. So I just wrestle here and there, and I have the insurance and a good paycheck. So I don't want to mess any of that up.
Yeah, absolutely. You keep yourself in good shape. I saw you do a few things with TNA, maybe a couple months ago. They had something with you on where there was Moose or something, I want to say. And
they brought me down, and just for a couple of days. Didn't hardly know anybody at all. I mean, just as far as the staff goes, like Chris Sabin and D'Lo Brown and guys like that. But pretty much everybody else, I was like, wow, it's been a long time. But yeah, I'm still keeping in shape, and I train, pretty much every day, and still do, martial arts training and, working out in the mornings and stuff before I go to work and stuff,
Yeah, you were training before
do a lot
you
of
got into
domestic stuff.
You were always training even before you got into pro wrestling, right? You were always big into martial arts and boxing and stuff, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I was boxing when I was 7 years old. My dad was a boxer. He boxed after Vietnam. He boxed in the Navy through the rest of his time, and picked up on that. And when I was about 7 years old, we started training with him a little bit, doing the Pee Wee Boxing League, and teenage stuff, and then started taking martial arts at about 10 years old, and then started, wrestling in school and, things like that. I never played football or baseball, but wrestled and, boxed and did Krav Maga and Aikido.
Wow. I always heard that, I always remember reading stories and stuff like that you were a guy who could handle himself if anything ever went wrong. So I guess it probably helped you out, in the wrestling business, if anyone tried to take advantage of you, I'd imagine.
It did, and at first, Ricky and, Tim and the rest of the people that had a lot, with my training and stuff, they, at first they were telling me to always respect the veterans and just listen to them and, things of that nature. So, a couple of the older guys back in the day, whenever I was young and stuff, I'd show up with Ricky or Tim or somebody like that. So if I wrestled them, they would just beat the living shit out of you, and they just hammer you. And I just thought that's the way wrestling was supposed to be, So I would just start giving it back, and then I noticed that once I started giving it back a little bit, they lightened up a whole lot, But far as taking the beating, it wasn't a big deal for me, because I was used to that kind of physical abuse, just in all the training growing up, still do to this day, as a matter of fact.
One thing, I'm a big MMA and boxing fan as well as pro wrestling. And one thing I feel like pro wrestlers don't always get the respect they deserve for their toughness in that community. And, yeah, I mean, I was looking at like some of the injuries, a lot of like Kurt Angle, like he's had a lot of injuries in pro wrestling. And like I was looking at you, like in the beginning, like you had a point in your career, like early on, you broke both your ankles in a match.
Yeah, I was in the WWE in Chattanooga in a tag team match, and we did Hurricanranas, turnbuckle to turnbuckle, across from each other. And Scotty 2 Hotty didn't let go of my leg. So when we did the full turn, he wound up literally, it messed him up too. I think it hurt his neck and shoulder, but yeah, he was completely upside down and landed on the back of both of my ankles. But I was able and tough enough, I guess, to walk out of the ring. I didn't want to be carried, so as bad as it was and as painful as it was, I walked out of the ring and up the ramp and in the back.
I was wondering about that. I was like, if you get both your ankles broken, if you're able to, again, that goes to you were used to being able to take a lot of punishment too, and probably had a better pain tolerance than most people.
Yeah, I think the public is more fixated on the fake part of it than really, thinking about what it really takes to be a good pro wrestler and the things we go through and what we put our bodies through. I'm almost 51, so I'm living right now, just with a lot of discomfort because of all those years, I've broken both of my legs. I've torn ACLs 2 or 3 times a piece, rotor cuffs 2 or 3 times a piece, tore my pec, my bicep, my shoulder, my trap, broken my jaw, my nose, my orbital socket, you name it, hands, feet. A couple ribs along the way.
It's a different kind of toughness, because I mean, like I have nothing but respect for MMA fighters too, but I mean, at the same time, it's a different kind of toughness. We'll take Mick Foley for example, to get your ear ripped off, and you're still,
yeah,
and doing like oh my god, it's unbelievable.
Well, I lived with Mick Foley the night I broke my ankles. When I got to the back, that man was standing there with 2 big bags of ice, and Dustin Rhodes had 2 chairs set up for me. They didn't have to do any of that, but they were watching the monitor, and they saw what had happened. They could tell that I was hurt, so, just the kindness of them, to, whenever I got back, Mick had to literally, walk around the corner there and get bags of ice, out of the ice machine and stuff like that before I could even get this back, so. Just we all looked out after each other, in the injury department, when something like that happens,
That's cool. At least you have that camaraderie where everybody has each other's back in that situation.
Yeah, I'll do that now with out here.
Speaking of injuries and toughness, now you eventually made it back to ECW, and you had an incident very early on. You broke your jaw. And then you didn't miss any time, didn't miss a match. You wrestled the next day. And it's shortly after that they got the TV title on you briefly. Do you think they put you in that position because of the toughness you showed and your willingness to work?
Yeah, that had a big part of it. I did. I broke my jaw on a Friday night at Center Stage in Atlanta. And the very next day, we were going to be going from there to Birmingham to wrestle a pay-per-view a couple of days later. This was on a Friday night, and Sunday we were doing the pay-per-view. So Saturday, I stayed up all night trying to find doctors. There was a flu epidemic going on down in Atlanta, so nobody considered broken jaw a life-threatening injury. So I had to wait for hours and hours in 2 different hospitals. So I just went on back to my hotel room and got on the phone and started, phone book and started calling just doctors all, of course it was late, nobody was open. One doctor actually called me back within about an hour, and I met him in Marietta about 6 o'clock in the morning, gave him 2 autographed pictures, took a couple of pictures with him, and he wired my jaw shut. And then from there I went back down to Atlanta and got me a couple of prescriptions from the CBS, took a nap, and then drove to Cornelia, Georgia with Jerry Lynn, and then we did a tag team match, enough with AJ Styles, one of the guys. And then from there went back down to Atlanta, did an appearance, and then drove all the way to Birmingham, Alabama on Sunday morning, and told Paul if he didn't put me on the pay-per-view, then I would quit. Because he took me out, they thought I wasn't coming back, so he took me off the pay-per-view, and I showed up, and I actually had to sign waivers for the night, that if anything happened, then I wouldn't be, hold them liable. So, but he wound up letting me on the show, and we did like an 8-man tag team.
Oh, man. Now,
and I still did my flips, too.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. What's your opinion? I mean, he's kind of a lightning rod. People seem to love him or hate him, but how was your relationship with Paul Heyman?
I had a great relationship with Paul. Honestly, I never had a problem with him. He was always supportive of me from day one. I mean, he already knew who I was when I first met him, and just by word of mouth and people talking good about me. And plus, I tag teamed with Ricky Morton for a few good years, in the beginning. So that kind of elevated my name a little bit, around, the Indies and then other places, like that too. So, so when I met him, I shook his hand, and I was David Jericho back then. And it was like, well, David Jericho, how are you? And I was like, well, I'm fine, Paul Heyman, how are you? And he always kind of, Northerners, they kind of like that Southern side of people, And, so, he thought I was funny, and I thought he was funny. We both talk funny. But, he gave me an opportunity. He didn't have to. Rob Van Dam is the one who introduced us. And Rob was trying to get me in ECW for a good year before I wound up actually just taking a chance. Because I drove up. I lived in Johnson City, Tennessee. I wrestled on a Friday night in North Carolina with Rob, and Rob was like, you need to come to ECW and all this other stuff, I can at least get you a match if you show up, so I drove all the way back from Winston-Salem, North Carolina to Johnson City, which is about 4.5 hours, and I got home at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I would turn on the TV, and late at night on the FSN channel, there was ECW back then. And so I watched it, and I was watching a match with Little Guido and Mikey Whipwreck, and I was like, shit, I'll do all of that, no problem. I can hang with these guys. So I called him, and I was like, where are you guys, when you going to be back up in ECW? And he goes, tomorrow. That's where I'm headed right now. And I was like, all right. So I was like, give me directions. So he gave me directions. Packed me up some clothes, and just at 1:30 in the morning, I think, and then hit the road by 2, and I was there about 10 a.m. in the morning.
Now, fast forward a little bit. Now, when you got the TV title briefly, you've been in wrestling, I'm going to guess, for maybe around a little bit at that time. Did you feel like you were starting to make it at that point?
I didn't really know much about ECW at the time, honestly, but I had already had some pretty good little trips, to like Mexico and Puerto Rico and places like that, so was already, talking to people, and getting stuff set up for Japan and places like that, so, I mean, at the time I wasn't thinking I was making anything. I was just trying to stay consistent, and like Ricky and Tim always told me, whatever you do, keep your name out there, so it doesn't matter where you're wrestling, but there's always going to be somebody to report on it, so I did as many independent shows as I could do. If Mexico would take me, I'd wrestle for all of them, and then I'd drive all damn night to do a little shotgun indie show, So at that time, I wasn't thinking about making it per se. I was just trying to stay busy. But then once I was there, I realized that this is going to be a pretty big thing,
Did Paul give you the Kid Rock persona kind of thing, or how did that come about?
Yeah. I was David Jericho, and I was there from like 95 to late 96 and broke my leg. And so I was out till 98. So when I went back, Chris Jericho had already been there since I had been gone and went to WCW. So the Jericho name was kind of, thrown out there pretty big. He gave a give a big identity to the name, you know. So when I went back, they were like, you know, let's call you something else. So at first I was going as Davey Morton and Davey Cash and a couple of other different names that they were just throwing along the way. And then one night, see, they did all the production out of Paul's basement at his house.
Wow.
So, yeah, this is the old school now. Like, whenever you got two TVs set up, you got the two, you know, the recorders and the VCR and all that stuff, you know. That's how they did it, the old school way. But anyway, MTV was playing on one of the TVs. So while they were filming, recording the match that I just had with Easy Money, at the end of it, the tape popped out and the TV came back on, and Kid Rock video was playing on MTV. And so we both had the long hair. We had like a little bit of a look, you know, together, the same. So I show up in Poughkeepsie, New York, and Tommy Dreamer walks by me and says hello to me. And as he's walking by, he stops and turns around, and he's like, by the way, you're no longer David Jericho, Paisano, Morton, and all that. And I'm like, okay, who am I? He goes, you are now Kid Cash. And I was like, okay. He goes, you know who Kid Rock is? And I was like, I don't. He goes, okay, well, do some research this week while you're home, and I want you to look like him next week. That's when I went to Hot Topic and got some baggy pants and some boxer shorts and a hat and showed up.
I love professional wrestling, but man, what a business, huh? Like, where else would that be where you're like, you're now Kid Cash and you have to go some research?
And I didn't know the whole thing behind it for years until one day Tommy Dreamer was TNA in our dressing room and then told me the story, how it all came about.
Before I move on from ECW, I got two people I want to ask you about that would have worked there. New Jack. How was New Jack?
You gotta love New Jack.
Yeah.
New Jack was awesome. I knew him from the Smoky Mountain wrestling days. And after he left, he went to ECW. And then shortly after that, I left and went to ECW as well. So him and Mustafa, they were, had a great tag team and stuff. You just gotta know how to handle New Jack, you know.
Yeah.
New Jack is New Jack, and don't try to micromanage him or anything like that. Don't try to give him advice and calm him down or anything like that. Just go with it, and you know, if he gets a little too crazy, then you know, kind of mosey along somewhere else, you know. Just don't get in the way after that, you know.
I think we've all had that friend. Just like, all right.
Yeah, but a lot of people take, New Jack is New Jack. Anybody who knows him or has ever been around him knows that he just says whatever is on his mind. When it offends people, he don't care. So, why go around him if you're going to be offended by him,
Sure.
So, he never offended me. He liked me, and we got along, and, he loved Ricky Morton to death because Ricky helped and then they stop out, a lot in the Smoky Mountain days. And, as far as, building his knowledge and stuff like that of the sport, and matches and things. So, we always had a good relationship. So, I never had a problem with him. He never had a problem with me. And, we hug every time we see each other. I just don't go drinking with him.
That's awesome. Well, actually, okay, good. That's a good segue because the next guy I was going to ask you was Sandman.
Sandman, I love him to death. When I first met Sandman, I didn't know what to think of him because he was just so Philadelphia. Just everything was yo. He was loud. If you ever watch a Rocky Balboa movie or something like that, he epitomizes the true Philadelphia man. So he was a little bit of a shock to me at first, but he grew on me. The only thing I didn't like about him is that he did, he got drunk off of his ass, and then until I figured it out, when he wasn't drunk, he couldn't wrestle.
Shit.
But when he was drunk, he wrestled, actually pretty good. He could do arm drag, hurricanranas, and, things like that, things you would never expect him to be able to do, But the only thing I didn't like about him is, man, if you were ever in the way of him swinging that cane, you were going to hurt, because he was drunk, he would just take your brains out. I mean, and he would always hit you with the tip of that damn thing too, you know. So, and I never understood why. 'Cause I'm short and he's got very long arms, you know. So it's not that he couldn't hit his target, you know. But
I think that the fact that he wrestled better drunk, I think we just gave a new definition to the word functioning alcoholic. That's
absolutely, yeah, it definitely was. And plus, he was a riot too after the matches, you know, and back in the dressing room, and you know, listening to him tell stories in that drunk manner of his, you know, and then of course you would see him at the hotel bar, you know, still going, and just there was no stop to him, you know.
All right, so actually, one more question about ECW before we move on. Then, was there any funny road stories or anything like that come to mind with ECW times? Did you continue?
Yeah, the thing about the road stories with me, I was the only one at that time living in the South, and you know, ECW. The one thing Paul made me when I first went there. Paul made me pay my dues. You know, and that's why we have a lot of respect for each other and stuff, because, you know, I respect the fact that he made me pay my dues, and he respects the fact that I paid him, and I did it willingly. So, like, the first year, dude, I had to drive to every single fucking town. So I drove from Johnson City, Tennessee, to Philadelphia, to Allentown, to New York City, to everywhere, you know. Yeah, and Staten Island, Maine, Connecticut, I mean, you name it, I drove. And so by the time the shows were over with and everybody flew back home, it was taking me, and depending on where I was at, sometimes it was taking me 2 days to get home. So once I did get home, I would have about 2 days to sleep it all off, get my, you know, laundry done and clean the house and get things ready for the next 2 days to go back out on the road. So I spent a lot of time on my own, you know, by myself. So I didn't really, you know, get to drive around with too many people while I was there, because I was always driving up from Tennessee, you know. But a lot of crazy stories at the hotels. But I don't know if anybody would want me to tell those stories.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Now, I have in my notes here, too, one thing, you wrestled, if this is correct, one match in WCW, and it was like literally a week or month later, the company was bought?
Yeah. No, it wasn't even a month. It was like 2 weeks.
Wow.
I talked to WCW, John Laurinaitis, and they sent me a deal. I signed the deal. A week later, I went and did a Thunder, and had a really good match, and went home, and I had my packet, you know, for the next week. We were going to be in Panama City. John called me the day before I was going to leave and told me to just hold off. Just a lot of things were going on, and he was going to get back to me on the next road trip. Well, then of course I had to watch. You know, I was watching, and then I saw what happened. And then about 2 days later, he calls me back, and they told me that WWE bought the company, you know, bought WCW. They had a lot of wrestlers. They had 2 companies now, so they wanted to keep me, but the conditions have changed. When I signed, Jimmy Hart kind of worked as an agent for me, and I got a really good deal, you know, because of the ECW, you know, fame and stuff like that. So I got a nice deal, you know, guaranteed to hold the light heavyweight title. A couple of good years there, you know, options to re-sign and all that stuff. And then he comes back to me and says that they want to keep me, but they need me to move to Cincinnati, Ohio. They were going to renegotiate my contract. I believe it was going to be all the way down to like 60 or 65,000, something like that. I would be called up whenever they had a position for me. And at that time, I was already like 30 years old, 31 years old. Had a house, had, kids, 2 kids, so I just couldn't, and why would I want to live in Cincinnati? I lived in Nashville, so it was only going to be about a 3-hour drive for me. So I could go up and stay a couple of days, but I wanted to be able to come back home. And they wanted me to stay there and train at Les Thatcher's gym, I guess do his TV, Heartland Wrestling. And I was just like, I don't I've been in business for 11 years. Why would I need to be trained? You know, and I was an ECW original and standout, so why would I need to be trained? So got back with Jimmy, and Hulk Hogan got in on the deal. Just suggested that it wouldn't be a good thing for my career, because the longer I was there, the more my name value would go down, until they wound up calling me up, which could be, in John Laurinaitis' words, were, you know how the business is, kid. It could be 6 weeks, it could be 6 months. Who knows? So, I was already, my name value was still going. It was still hot, and I had other offers to go to Japan and, back to Mexico and Puerto Rico and places like that. But Jimmy Hart and Hulk Hogan were starting the XWF. So I wound up saying no to WWE, and I went with Jimmy and Hulk, signed a 3-year deal with who was it? Gosh, it was the Home Shopping Network. Yeah. They were the benefactors of the XWF. So Jimmy got me a no-compete clause. So if the company ever went under, I would continue to keep getting paid. Yeah, or they could buy me out. So we did like 8 tapings. We did about 10, maybe, house shows, in Puerto Rico with Carlos Colon's guys, and we did some out in the Midwest with Terry Funk and them down in Texas and Oklahoma. And after that, they just got a phone call from Jimmy saying that the Home Shopping Network dropped them because some sort of India warehouse was getting taken over by China. So they took their money back. I think they put like $80 million up for that company.
Oh shit!
But so they took like 60 of it back. But I continued to keep getting paid. But within a month after that closing down, I signed with TNA. So I was getting paid from TNA, but I was also still getting a paycheck from the Home Shopping Network for 2.5 more years.
Jimmy Hart helped you out as much as he could, huh? I thought he got some good deals for you here.
Yeah, Jimmy, when I met Jimmy that was 15, 20 years ago, he just liked me, and he always offered, his help if I ever needed it, but I would call him and get advice from him, and then out of that, he would wind up, helping me or guiding me in some way. So, Jimmy, I owe Jimmy a ton in my career.
You get to TNA, and I didn't realize you had worked with Dusty Rhodes in a tag match. It was you and, now Lance Archer. I think he was going by Dallas then. Yeah. You guys were the tag champs, and it was Dusty Rhodes and James Archer. What's it like working with Dusty Rhodes and some of those guys there?
It was great. I actually worked Dusty in quite a few matches, in singles matches too. And and it was just a great experience. Of course, it's Dusty Rhodes, man. And he was so great. He was like, "Don't change anything about you." He goes, "But there's some things that I'm just not going to do." And I'm like, "I understand." But I showed him the respect because I was brought in back in, like you say, 89 and 90, when wrestling was still in that rock and roll express phase, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so it was more the old school way, and so I knew that way. That's the way I was trained, and then over time I developed my own style. But whenever I wrestled Dusty, I went right back to the days of me training with Ricky Morton. I just let Dusty call the match, and then I added my stuff in there, here and there. And I sold, and I was a heel. Whenever I was a heel, I was the old Tully Blanchard, you know what I'm saying, growing up as a full horseman. So I kind of brought out that persona as a heel, and he just loved it. He was like, "Wow." He goes, "I wasn't expecting that, He said, "You didn't even do any high-flying stuff." No. And I was like, "Well, you don't have to." And he says, "I love you, kid." Because, whenever he hears somebody say, "I don't have to," because that means that they know. Mm-hmm. They know how to work. Instead of flipping and doing all the crazy moves, they literally know how to draw a crowd by work. Mm-hmm. And we drew a crowd. We did. And I got to work with Harley Race for a few times. I was doing like a legend killer kind of a thing. Yeah. And so, I got to get punched out by Harley Race. And
Terry Taylor and Larry Zbyszko and Bobby Eaton, and so it's just being able to wrestle those guys and work with those guys. I mean, for me, and coming up in the era that I did, it was just, for me, it was just icing on the cake on my career,
How was your time in TNA overall?
The worst company I've ever worked for.
No shit.
No, really. I mean, and they know it. I still tell them all to this day, Even when I went down and did those few shows, they were like,
oh.
It's a different management, so no, I don't. But no, it just wasn't a good time there. They took full advantage of everything and just a lot of stuff that, you don't want people in the public to know, because you could get sued over it,
Sure.
But, I mean, just a lot of trouble with them, Their vision was completely different than mine and everybody else's. We just argued about, money a lot and stuff. They lied to you coming in, because it was a new company and stuff. And, I was already a star from ECW and, and other places and things of that nature, So I come in there and they talk all this big stuff, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and, if you can settle for this amount for the first year, then we'll hook you up after that once we get rolling. And I did, and they never changed the pay. I had to, threaten to quit a dozen times, just to get, a few extra $100 a week out of them, and then checks weren't always on time, and then you find out that some young rookie kid that, that they're using me for, that's what they wanted. They wanted somebody with a name value to put over all these new young guys that they wanted to brand for their company. So I'm making everybody look, everybody I was working, make them, give them a name, basically, give them an identity by wrestling and beating me, So every night I'm getting beat by some young kid that nobody's ever heard of, and I'm making them a star, but yet they didn't want to pay me what I was worth, right. But come to find out that they're paying the kid that I'm putting over and making a star more than me, and who's never been anywhere other than the independent scene in TNA. That's it. So it was insulting, and stuff. They were doing it to other people. But at that time, WWE had already bought WCW, and they bought AWA. They just bought everybody, right. At that point. So unless you was with WWE, TNA was the only way to go. So a lot of guys just didn't even say anything. They just accepted, what they were given, and I just wasn't accepting it, and so I quit a few times, walked out a few times, sat at home a few times. At one point I had to threaten to sue them to get my money, because they wouldn't back pay you. They would, give you a check this month, but then you'd go 2 months without a check. And then they would give you a check on the third month, but not back pay you for the last couple of months.
Almost like that other time didn't happen. Like you weren't missing that money still.
Right, exactly, And, at this point, it's like, look, I'm a grown man. I'm not some young 20-year-old kid trying to make it in the business in this company. I've already been somewhere. I've already established my name. I've got a family. I got a house. I'm an adult, so my bills are important to me, and I had no problems paying my bills as a pro wrestler before I came here. Now that the little contract with Home Shopping Network had ended, I was just counting on the TNA paycheck all along, after and that just was not enough. It wasn't even remotely near enough. So they bring out T-shirts and stuff like that, and just because of the merchandise in the contract, if they brought out merchandise with your likeness on it, then they had the opportunity to roll you over on your contract. So at the end of my contract, I've already found me a job. I'm ready to go to work for somebody else, and they rolled me over on my contract. And, I basically did everything but beg, Jeff to let me out of my contract. And I was like, why would you want anybody working for you that doesn't want to be here? And he looked at me and said, because it's my prerogative. And that's whenever it all ended for me. I was like, you know what? I'm going to do everything I can to get fired. And I did. I wound up getting fired. And then I went to WWE from there. And when I left WWE, they were calling me again, but it was under different management. Bruce Pritchard and guys like that were running the show, Hulk Hogan, and, you know, and just a bunch of other people, you know, that I never thought would be running TNA, you know.
Yeah.
So I wound up going back there again, and things were good at first, but then the paycheck thing started happening again. You know, they would pay you, and then they wouldn't pay you for a couple of weeks, and then they wouldn't back pay you and stuff, and they would say there was no money. But yet I'm looking across the catering table at Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Kevin Nash.
Right.
I'm looking at Eric Bischoff. I'm looking at Bruce Pritchard. Somebody's getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
Why are the talent not getting paid, but yet those guys are getting paid? You know, so it just wasn't what I was in. So I pretty much told them I wanted my release at that point, and they gave it to me this time. I didn't get fired. So
I heard somebody say, I can't remember the wrestler's name, but they were talking about how TNA was hurting and they need to make cuts. But they didn't cut Hulk Hogan. They cut him a mid-level wrestler. And it was like that was the equivalent of we're on hard times and starving. But rather than cut out the filet mignon, we cut out the beans and the bread. You know, like why would we?
Well, it was because of Dixie Carter, you know.
Yeah.
Once Jeff had been left and wasn't a part of the company anymore, you know, she was trying to run a company that she had no idea how to run, you know.
Yeah.
And so what she did is she counted on Hulk Hogan, Eric Bischoff to run her company. Now, you remember WCW, don't you?
Right.
Ted Turner, right? Did you not think that wouldn't happen again if you got a billionaire's pocketbook to play with? I mean, it wasn't her money; it was her dad's money.
Yeah.
You know, so of course they're going to pay themselves. And of course they're going to re-sign themselves and give themselves signing bonuses of about $300,000.
Yeah.
Give themselves signing bonuses.
Right. I mean, I think we can look at like
not for $50,000 or anything like that, but for like $300,000 and $400,000.
Yeah.
Kevin Nash was making, I think, $750,000, and Kurt Angle was making like I think the same. But Kurt was actually wrestling and being a star of the show and stuff, you know. And Nash and those guys were just in the back, you know. So.
How was your time in WWE before that? They gave you the Cruiserweight title. Obviously, WWE for me, it's like, even at their heyday when they were really cooking on all cylinders, they've never really been one to really push the Cruiserweight division, it feels like, though. Overall, still, though, how was your time and what was that like?
Great time. I mean, it was a good experience, and it was a completely different level. You know, growing up in the business, you always hear that WWE is the pinnacle of the sport. And once you're there, you finally realize what they were talking about. The atmosphere is completely different, a whole lot more professional, a lot more going on. It's just such a big company, you know. Just watching them set stage and, you know, and their creative teams and, you know, it's just so many people in one building at one time, you know, trying to make this show right, you know. ECW had a few people running the show. TNA had just a few people running the show, you know. WWE has an entire army. It's just crazy. And, you know, and they really put me out there pretty good. They touched on my character a whole lot better than what, you know, TNA did, you know. So I had a great time.
Is there anything you want to promote? Anything you want to talk about you got going on? I know you said you're pretty much retired, but is there anything you want to get out there?
Yeah, I mean, I still do, like I said before, you know, I still do seminars and stuff like that. So if anybody's interested in seminars or appearances, yeah, go to Kid Cash. I think it's David Cash. It's my Facebook, and just shoot me an email, and my Instagram. I think it's David Kid Cash or something like that. I don't know. But you can just look it up. It'll show you. I'm old now. I just work all day and come home and watch watch Fox News.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it a lot, man.
Hey, man, no worries. Anytime.
Hey, everybody, it's Rich Palladino, the voice of Beyond Wrestling, Chaotic Wrestling, Limitless Wrestling, telling each and every one of you to listen to the Working Fans Podcast with Dave, AJ, and, of course, producer Joe, wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure you check them out. It's the Working Fans Podcast.
All right, everybody, it's the Working Fans Podcast with your boy Dave, and got a special guest today, a guy who has worked for promotions like Chaotic Wrestling, Beyond Wrestling, and even ECW. He's one of the great ring announcers, and some would say the voice of New England, Rich Palladino. Rich, how are you, sir?
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Were you always a fan, and how did you end up breaking into business?
Always a fan, probably since I was about 8 years old, 8 or 9 years old. I just remember during the Bruno and Backlund days, and just got mesmerized by it the first time I saw it on TV. Captain Lou Albano was managing Bulldog Brower, and Brower had broken a chair, and Albano had a piece of the chair and was choking a guy with it on TV, and I'm like, yeah, what is this? And, you know, as a 8-year-old kid, you're like waiting for the cops to come. I'm like, okay, this is going to be my every Saturday morning. So, yeah, so always a fan, still a fan to this day at 51 years old, which is pretty sad. Met a guy that knew a guy that introduced me to the Boston Bad Boy, Tony Rumble. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Tony.
Yes.
But he gave me my big break. We met in 92. Did some commentary in a TV studio in Augusta, Maine, for a promotion that never even got off the ground. Guys run a TV taping in Lowell, Massachusetts, and I sold myself to that guy. He introduced me to Tony. We both earned our payday that day. I never saw the light of day, but Tony ended up running shows like about a year and a half later. He got my number, and that's how it all started in 93. Believe it or not.
Wow.
You guys probably weren't even born.
No, I'm actually, I was born, I'm 43, 76. You're just you're a little bit, like the era I grew up on was, earliest memories was like Bob Backlund hooking the chicken wing on people.
Okay. The old Bob Backlund.
Yes. One thing I wanted to ask you before I continue with your career, I had David Starr on here a while back, and when I first started getting back into independent wrestling, about maybe 2015, I went to a Beyond Wrestling show, and I saw the introduction you gave for David Starr, and like I just loved it. Like I was like hooked on that guy's persona, and a really big part of it was that ring introduction. And he told me that you actually helped come up with that a little bit. Like you guys spit some ideas back and forth, and one of them was the cream in your coffee. Is that correct?
Yeah, that and your favorite wrestler's favorite wrestler,
yes.
I borrowed from Dan Barry, because for a short stint when Dan Barry was doing a singles run somewhere out in Connecticut or something, we were working some shows, and he was like, announce me as your favorite wrestler's favorite wrestler. And then, since then, he had already moved on to Team Tremendous, and so, yeah, me and David Starr were working on some stuff. I had cream in your coffee, all that in a slice cheddar, all that in a bag of chips. Those are things that I grew up, me and my friends grew up, in my real life, grew up saying. Like, that was just like the funny ha-ha stuff of the 90s, I would say. So, yeah, so I can take credit for the first line and stealing the second line from Dan Barry. So, but yeah, so it's funny because as soon as you said David Starr, I pulled out my note cards right next to my desk here and actually have the entire thing because I have to keep a couple of copies of it because sometimes it changes, but at my age, I can't remember it.
No, I get that.
I want it. Yeah, I need somebody to stand with the T-shirt with their back to me, and I could do it without looking at the index card. But it's one of my favorite things to do. So, hell of a talent.
Oh, yes. Now, is that, I've heard for years about wrestlers going up to like the commentators and the color guys about maybe trying to get over holds or certain things. Is it pretty common, besides him and Dan Barry, to have a lot of people give you some feedback on how they want to get announced or nicknames or anything?
Yeah, but I kind of elicit it myself. I always, what I've been doing for the past, 15 or so years of my 26 plus in the business is I travel with a roster that's alphabetical. I have it on a flash drive here at home, and I update it and I print it. So if somebody's weight changes, hometown or something. So usually I'm working with somebody that I haven't worked with for a while. I'll be like, oh, is it still, wrestler name, hometown, 250 pounds, whatever. So I do know that and beyond. I know that there was just a tweet out there that only David Starr can have multiple nicknames. Everybody else gets one. So, but yeah, so I kind of bring it on myself, and then I always talk to the promoter first just to make sure it's okay. So,
Oh, that's good. That's interesting.
Yeah.
This is just kind of in doing some research, I saw you singing karaoke to kick off an event for Limitless Wrestling. Or you were singing a song. Does Rich like to do karaoke? Because I could almost see the gimmick working for you. I was just curious if you were a karaoke guy.
Rich loves to do karaoke. I have no problem being the center of attention. In my professional world, I've been very fortunate. I'm actually on the job that I have right now in the real world is only the third real job that I've had in my entire life. And if you think about the fact that I'm 51 years old, I've been in the workforce, 30-something years, very fortunate. But when it always comes down to corporate events, presidents, the vice presidents of the company always know what I do on the side. So I'm always the one that they'd be like, hey, can you go up on that stage in front of the 500 people in this room and get everybody fired up? Or, hey, we got rock band karaoke. Can you break everybody in and go do a song? So it's like I have no problem doing that. I don't claim to be a good singer, but I will say that show was called Flirting with Disaster, which is one of my favorite songs. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Maverick Wild, New England independent wrestling icon. He used to use that, the former Chaotic Wrestling Heavyweight Champion. That was his theme song, but I always loved the song. So when Limitless came out with a show called Flirting with Disaster, I actually hit up Randy and I said that there's a guy that actually plays guitar. He helps out the shows. I think he's a friend of Randy's. And I said, is he going to be there? And can he play that? Because I'll sing it to the ring. And he said, yeah, let's get it done. And I was like, oh, shit, this is actually going to happen. So it was fun. I love to sing. I absolutely love it. So
that's awesome. I almost want to say, and take this as a compliment, please. I almost see you as kind of like the host of a party, and maybe almost like you kind of with the tuxedo, like one of the Blues Brothers or something. I don't know. It's just pretty fun, though.
I could dance as good as the late John Belushi, probably. So, but I think that's part of my life. I think I got that from my dad. My dad, who's 83 years old, still sings. He's pretty much a one-man show now. He plays at nursing homes and stuff like that. And I always joke because he should be in a nursing home because he's so old. But he's always been a singer. He's always been a musician. So I think I kind of inherited that from him. So a little tidbit out there. I usually don't even talk about my family that much. But
that's
I've been
cool.
a performer for a long time. So.
Yeah, I mean, hey, we get a lot of our stuff from our parents, good or bad, whatever it is. It's definitely. And actually, you have twins, don't you?
14 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do they get to go out on shows with you ever, or what do they think about Dad doing this gig?
They think it's cool. Now, they're 14 now, so they're going to high school next year. Hopefully, if schools are open next year. My son was really into it, and I do love to drop names. But at a Beyond show, Drew Gulak came up to my son and he said, "Oh, who are you?" And Anthony Palladino. And he looks at me and goes, "You know what that means, Rich?" He goes, "First timer, guest ring announcer." So Drew had actually put him up to it. So there's a video out there. I can't remember what the name of the show was, but my son thought to introduce a match between Shinron and Flip Gordon in front of about 300 people, 400 people in Somerville, Mass. at one of the Beyond shows. So he actually wrote a paper, I want to say in probably third or fourth grade. It was called The Greatest Day of My Life. Oh. So, and my daughter used to love it. She used to be in love with another former Chaotic champion, Julian Starr. That used to be her favorite. But they've both kind of outgrown it, but they tolerate the fact that I do it. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of people that end up outgrowing it, and then there's us who just never quite shake it.
Yeah. I'm the latter. I could never shake it. So.
Same. Yeah, so I'll get back to that hosting for a little bit, too. You do seem like you have a real closeness with the fans. You feed off the energy, and it's a big party atmosphere.
Yeah, I take my job. I tell every wrestler and every fan, I take my job way more seriously than I probably should, but it's because of the amount of respect that I have for the business. And having been a fan for as long as I have, I never want to dial it in. I mean, for whatever role, however big or small people may envision the ring announcer as part of the show, a lot of people give me great feedback that I try to. I try and give everything that big match feel, that WrestleMania moment that, you got to be here, you got to be living this. And yeah, I'm very fortunate, a great rapport with the fans and a lot of great support, which, believe me, there's been a lot of times, especially over the past few years, where they're kind of all right, come on. I know I'm on the back nine of my career, but, it's believe it or not, it'll sound so campy, but, it's just that inspires me to keep doing what I'm doing. Is just getting that kind of love and reception and appreciation from fans wherever I go. So it's humbling, to be honest with you.
Sure, I can see that, and it's awesome you get that feeling. Now, you worked for ECW for a while. How did that come about?
So when I had broken in with Tony Rumble, first show I did was in 1993. Two guys that were on that show were Taz and Tommy Dreamer, and I'm proud to say I have a friendship with Tommy Dreamer to this day. Taz and Tommy vouched for me. They were looking for a ring announcer, and they started doing shows up here in New England. They had used another gentleman, Mel Simons, great guy, been around forever. He was Killer Kowalski's ring announcer, but I don't know if they didn't want. I don't know if he didn't want to do the shows or if they were just looking for somebody. So Paul Richard, had recommended me. He used to be the Extreme Enforcer, the referee, Paul Richard, and then Taz and Tommy Dreamer vouched for me, and that's how that came about. I literally went my first show. I had a top ticket, and when I got there, Paul Richard asked me if I had my tuxedo in the car. And I did, and the rest is history. So I got to work for them for about 2.5 years, from late '96 till early '99. So it's a hell of a run.
Story here is basically always have your tuxedo, always have your wrestling gear, always be ready to work and be ready for opportunity, I guess.
Absolutely.
Now, so being from New England and working ECW, were you at the mass transit incident?
That was my first ECW show.
Holy crap.
Yeah, so it's funny, after the Dark Side of the Ring came out, I got a lot of requests, like local podcasters wanting to interview me about that. I have no problem talking about it, but it's like, how much more can be said about it? But, I mean, hell, I'll be honest with you. Colt Cabana asked me to be on his podcast years ago and said, do you have any good stories? And, of course, I opened with, well, my first ECW show was Mass Transit. And he was like, you're on. And, but it was surreal. So, yeah, that was my November 23rd of 96. That was my very first gig for ECW. And, I was probably as closest next to the camera guy to that whole mess, But, yeah, it was frightening. It was something that is etched in my brain for the rest of my life. But, you know what? Part of wrestling history. So,
yeah.
But it was chaotic, for lack of a better word. And at that point, I'd only been in the business, ring announcing, for a little over 3 years. So that was about as real as it got. And, but it happened. It was historic. And it was, like I said, something I'll never, ever, ever forget.
We just recorded an interview with another ring announcer, I'm sure you're aware, Gary Capetta. And he had a story in his book I didn't know. I probably knew it at the time, I forgot. He was the guy that Germany Mick Foley threw his ear to. And I remember thinking, well, I guess adrenaline just takes over at that point, because how often does something like that happen in your lifetime?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for me, my claim to fame, because people saw that and said, "Oh, you were there, right?" And I said, "Yeah." So I was the guy that handed the microphone to New Jack. He said, "I don't care if this fat mother effer bleeds to death." I ran to the back when I saw the kid that much blood. I did run to the back, grabbed Paul Richard, and Heyman was very close by, and I said, I think we have a potential situation out there. I think we need a lot of towels. And I'm saying it very calmly now. I think I was a little panicked that night. But it was just, more than I'd ever witnessed before. But, yeah, when you talk about Gary Capetta, that was part of his Body Slams book. It was about that, getting Mick Foley's ear and putting it on ice in Germany when that happened. And I do want to say Gary Capetta is one of my childhood idols. Very friendly rapport with Gary whenever I do have the opportunity to see him. But I literally grew up watching he and Joe McHugh as the two ring announcers for the old WWF every Saturday morning. So Gary's a great guy. He's got some amazing stories.
Are you, would you say Gary, or is there anybody else too besides Joe, or influences, or is there anybody maybe you borrow something from that as fans we wouldn't notice? Do you ever look at other ring announcers, whether wrestling, boxing, or MMA, and go, oh, I kind of like the way you do this, so I could put a slant on that? Or do you just have your own thing, you would say?
I like to think I have my own thing. I mean, my all-time favorite hero, idol, ring announcer, icon was Howard Finkel, who recently passed away, and I got to learn a lot from Howard. We used to co-host the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame every year. Even before that, I always had a very, very good rapport with Howard. And, I think back to my fellow ring announcer brethren, Bobby Cruz, who actually had an audition with WWE and got to meet Vince McMahon at the end of the night. And Vince told him, "Hey, Bobby, you did a great job. Next time, don't be so Howard Finkel-ish." So, to me, I always tried to have my own style just because of that. Bobby's a really good friend of mine. I always remember that. But, no, I've always done my own thing. But I've always been, I want to be the guy, the old school ring announcer that says in the corner to my left. I love when I do stuff in, like, New Hampshire where they have a state athletic commission where you've got to read all the rules at the beginning. Because that's what I grew up watching. You watch Gary Capetter and Joe McHugh, the old TV shows from the 70s and 80s. They would run down, sanctioned by, and the doctor in attendance, and the attending, the officials assigned by the State Athletic Commission. I used to love doing all that kind of stuff because to me that's old school. I'm an old school fan. So I've always kind of had my own style, but it's funny because when the One Fall thing really took off over the past few years, and that's what I have on my T-shirt, but people thought I came up with that. But I'm like, no, that's the way wrestling's been announced since as long as I've been watching it. It just all of a sudden became a thing where everybody, I don't even have to say it. Like I said, the following contest is scheduled for,
right,
and everybody else One Fall. And I've always tried to have my own style, but I've always just wanted it to be very professional. And again, I'll mention Drew Gulak. When I first started with Beyond, we were interacting on Facebook Messenger after the very first American Rana that I had announced for them. And he told me that I added a lot of legitimacy to what professional wrestlers do. And to me, that's always been, like I said, immense amount of respect for this business. I wear a tuxedo. It's why I take my job so seriously. So,
no, I agree. I think it's great to add legitimacy to pro wrestling. I mean, for me personally, as an old school fan, I get we evolve, but that's one of the things I like. Like when you can suspend disbelief and you give me a rough athletic presentation, that's always been kind of what I like too.
Yeah. It adds to the overall performance because nothing drives me more insane than when I see like a kid in like jeans and a T-shirt or something and trying to put himself over, as the ring announcer. It's like, no, it's not your job. Your job is to put the talent over. So, and that's something I've prided myself on for over a quarter of a century, believe it or not.
I noticed that, Jim Ross is a ring announcer, but there's been times they've brought him into the ring to do stuff. And has that ever happened to you? Have you ever been involved in a match, whether a tag match or like some kind of, any kind of gimmick, anything like that? Did you ever get involved in anything like that?
A few times. I got, quote, inducted into the business by Kevin Sullivan in '94. Where he came out of the ring, grabbed me by the lapel, and open hand slapped me on the side of the on one of my ears, and gave me a good bell ring. And that was not part of anything that was planned ahead of time. But I did do a couple of things with formerly Handsome Johnny in Chaotic Wrestling when he had turned heel. He's now the Viking Raiders Ivar. He used to be called Handsome Johnny. So if you look up any old Chaotic Wrestling stuff, that was one of his. He's had multiple characters, but yeah, he was in Chaotic. He was Handsome Johnny, and he had just turned heel. He was in a tag team with a guy named Psycho, and they were called Pretty Psycho. And they had kind of split up, and we did a spot where he punched me, and I went down and carried out to the back and whatever. But then a couple shows later, I got to slap him in the face during a match against Psycho, which got a huge pop. I did another thing with Chaotic where Sean Gorman, legendary manager in this area, and also a fine author as well, he had taken over control of Chaotic Wrestling to the point where we filmed something at the office, the company I used to work for. We actually filmed something in the parking lot with me coming out of the office and he handing me my pink slip that I was fired. And then you fast forward a couple of shows and I ended up coming out under a hood and spearing him to help regain control of the company. And then in a company called the XWA down in Rhode Island, Bobby Cruz and Ring of Honor had infiltrated and were taking over the Extreme Wrestling Alliance. And me and Bobby got into a little program, nothing overly physical. He nut-shotted me one show, and then a couple shows later I ended up spearing him, to help set up for the finish. So other than that, it's been very few and far between. Oh, and I had one match at Beyond Wrestling against Larry Legend. Yeah, it was about 30 seconds, a couple of shoves, a couple of slaps, and then Christina Diamond, no longer in the business, but she was part of Pink Azusa at the time. she came in and not shotted me, and I won by DQ, so I tell everybody I'm undefeated as a professional wrestler. I don't like to get physically involved unless it adds something to the story, and I think everything that I've rambled on about for the past 3 minutes added something to the depth of the storyline within each company. So, as I get older and fatter and grayer, the less and less physical stuff I want to do. So, only if it makes sense, but
right.
It's been fun, but I'm not trained. I don't know how to bump. I mean,
yeah,
I just do what I can.
I'd imagine it's one of those things, almost like it's kind of fun in the moment. Hey, afterwards, like, yeah, we did that. That was cool. But you're a ring announcer. You want to be a ring announcer for the most part, and you enjoy that. That's what I'm getting, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the physical stuff, I actually would get very nervous. One, because I don't want to hurt myself, and two, I don't want to make it look that much worse than it is than having a non-trained announcer in there taking bumps. I told you I love to drop names, but Tommaso Ciampa was trying to teach me how to do a clothesline, and I was doing the thing with Sean Gorman, because the idea was I was going to come out clothesline him. I couldn't throw a good clothesline, and he goes, just tackle him, just throw your body at him, whatever you do, they're going to fuck. And then he was absolutely right. So, but yeah, I think I'm retired from anything physical other than holding up a title belt for AC Mack or something, but that's about it.
Did I read this right? Are you in the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame?
I am. New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, Chaotic Wrestling Hall of Fame, and the former NWA New England where I got my start. And I just turned to look at the plaques on my wall right behind me because I take those very seriously. They mean a lot to me, so humbled to be recognized by my peers in any way, shape, or form. So.
It's awesome. What are you doing right now with this whole quarantine thing? How you keeping busy, or how's this going here for you?
It's not too bad for me. For my 9 to 5, I work from home anyways, and I'm in sales, and my customer is in Massachusetts. I have another one in right over the Mass border in New York. So I have 2 customers that are within driving distance. My corporate office is in New York, so for the most part, I'm working from home anyways. But I'm not used to working from home while my wife is working from home right upstairs, and with 14-year-old twins being at home. So the 9 to 5 hasn't been bad, but I've got a checklist here next to my desk. I've already lost about 23 bookings going up to this year's New England Hall of Fame got canceled already. And I was supposed to do a bunch of shows, a handful of shows anyways, in Tampa during Mania Week, including one for Beyond Wrestling. So that part is killing me. And as we're recording now, I should be in Worcester for Season 3 of Uncharted Territory for Beyond Wrestling. So with that on hold, that's the part that's killing me the most is, with everything going on with the pandemic, you start to wonder when is everything going to get back to normal, and will independent wrestling be normal again? Because I would think I got a few more years left in the tank. But I will say during this whole quarantine, I've spent more time with my family than I have for as long as I've been doing wrestling anyways. We have dinner as a family every night, which is something I'm not accustomed to, with my wife getting home from work later, and, the kids running off to their sports. So I've done more cleaning, more organizing, more cooking, and I only read wrestling books, and I'm reading accepted Pat Patterson's book right now. So, other than that, just I'm binge watching Mid-South Wrestling too on the WWE Network. Yes.
Good era wrestling. I stumbled upon Mid-South when I was younger, and it was Jim Ross doing a call, and Michael Hayes and Ted DiBiase are fighting on the ramp, and I was only used to Vince McMahon and Tony Schiavone, and I'm hearing this guy talking about beating the hell out of each other, and I was like, that hooked me big at that point there.
And like you said, suspending disbelief and giving it that sense of reality is nobody better than JR.
No.
And Mid-South, I mean, God, I wish I'd got there. I grew up in Massachusetts my whole life, and I remember getting it. I think TBS aired it for a brief period of time, I think on Sunday night in 1985. But I always read the magazines and everything. Now watching everything that I remember reading about and watching it in succession, I get lost in it. So it's like the old saying, if you've never seen it, it's new to you. That's the way I feel when I'm watching this. And I tweeted something a few weeks ago, and somebody that hosts a podcast about Mid-South Wrestling, wants me to be on as a guest because I'm so passionate about what I'm watching. It's such a great era. So, and hell, if we weren't quarantined, I'd still be binge watching Mid-South Wrestling. But I'm just watching a little bit more of it now than I have. So.
Yeah, it is good stuff. I'm gonna let you go, Rich. You've been great. Is there anything you want to promote though that you got going on still?
The only thing I'd want to promote is for everybody to support their favorite independent wrestler. I have no right asking anybody to buy my merchandise. I ask that everybody just goes out and supports independent wrestling because I have a lot of good friends that make a living doing this. So Pro Wrestling Tees is your spot, or if there's a favorite performer from Beyond Wrestling, Chaotic Wrestling, Limitless Wrestling, wherever I should be announcing or anyone I'm not announcing, just please go out and support your favorite wrestler. I got shut down from Pro Wrestling Tees shop because I don't have enough followers. So if anybody wants to follow me, it's at Rich Palladino on Twitter. I'm under Rich Palladino on Facebook, and Ringside Rich on the old Instagram. So like I said, more than anything, please support independent wrestling. Oh, and if you want to try out independent wrestling TV, go to iwtv.live. If you use the passcode ONEFALL, like I say in every match, you get a free 5-day trial, and I encourage everybody to give that a whirl. And subscribe to Beyond Wrestling on YouTube because 2.2 million isn't enough. We want more. So, yeah, that's all I got to plug. And Chaotic Wrestling on YouTube. We're airing a lot of our shows. We would do a show and break it up into 3 parts and air it for 3 weeks on YouTube. It's called Elevated. So check out Chaotic Wrestling on YouTube as well. They'll be airing a lot of classic stuff. So you'll be seeing the Handsome Johnny or the Ibars and the Tommaso Ciampas and the Kofi Kingstons and the Sasha Banks because they all started in Chaotic. So definitely check out Chaotic for a good slice of wrestling history right there.
Awesome, Rich. Thank you so much.